The first time Lark Hensley saw Jasper Kincaid, she was standing on a stepladder in his family's boathouse at 7 in the morning, holding a spirit level against the east wall, and she missed the reading entirely. He'd come in on oiled hinges, no warning, and she'd registered him the way you register a pressure change before you register anything specific. Tall, dark hair going silver at the temples. A fleece jacket over dress trousers, as though he'd been in a meeting in his sleep. He was holding 2 mugs of coffee and looking at the garland of cedar boughs and white peonies she'd spent the last hour stringing along the rafters, and his expression was the careful kind that people wear when they are trying very hard not to form an opinion out loud. "You're the designer," he said. Not a question. Low, unhurried. A voice used to rooms going quiet. "Lark Hensley." She came down the ladder, hand out, level still in the other. "Sorry for the hour. Senna said I could start early." Senna says a lot of things. There was warmth underneath it, the reflexive warmth of a sibling who has made peace with being regularly overruled. He looked at the level. "What are you measuring?" "Everything." She said it without thinking. "It's a floor." He handed her one of the mugs without being asked, then leaned against the nearest post and looked at the boathouse with the same grave attention he'd given her, assessing, not judging. The look of a man who spent most of his days being told what things were worth and had learned to form his own number first. "You moved the lighting fixture," he said. She had. 12 centimetres south, at 11 the night before, because the original position threw a shadow across the dance floor that would have driven her sideways all weekend. "It photographs better from the south angle. Senna's going to love it." "I know. That's why I moved it." Jasper Kincaid looked at her over the rim of his mug, and Lark had the particular unsettling sensation of being measured by someone who actually knew how. She was in trouble. She understood that the way she understood when a load-bearing wall was in the wrong place, with certainty, and very little she could do about it before the framing was in. The Kincaid estate sat on a long arm of Georgian Bay, 2 hours north of Toronto, all white cedar and fieldstone, and 3 generations of money made quiet by the time it reached the house. Senna had grown up here, barefoot on the docks, and she'd left at 17 for Toronto to study architecture, veered into landscape photography instead, which was, as she'd told Lark at their first meeting in a cramped Kensington Market studio 9 years ago, basically the same thing if you squint. They'd been friends since the night Senna helped carry a sofa up 4 flights of stairs without being asked. That kind of friendship didn't need explaining. Bryce Carmody was good for her. Lark had decided that in the first 30 seconds, when he'd asked a genuine question about timber framing and actually listened to the answer, he had the quiet confidence of a man who didn't need to fill silence, and he looked at Senna the way you look at something you'd stopped expecting to find. Lark had said yes to designing the wedding, without asking what the budget was. That was the kind of friend she was. She had not, in any of her careful preliminary site visits, anticipated that Senna's older brother would walk into a boathouse at 7 in the morning with 2 coffees and rearrange everything she thought she knew about the next 3 days. Joelle had warned her. Joelle warned her about most things from a position of cheerful authority. The brother, Joelle had said, feet on the dashboard of the rental car on the drive up, sunglasses pushed into her braids. Senna talks about him like he's a fact of geography, like he's Georgian Bay itself, just there, reliable, cold, inclined to flood in April. She loves him. She loves him, and she's terrified of disappointing him, and she's never once asked him for anything he didn't offer first. That's not the same as easy. Lark had filed it under not my concern, not my weekend, and believed herself completely. The coffee in the boathouse did not help. She spent the next 4 hours doing what she was good at, moving through the estate with her notebook and her level, and her absolute refusal to let anything sit crooked. The florist brought the wrong shade of cream. She redirected. The tent poles needed shimming on the north side. She shimmed. Bryce's aunt kept asking if Lark was the photographer. She redirected that too, and arranged for someone to bring the aunt a chair in the shade and a cup of Earl Grey. Senna appeared at noon in linen with wet hair, and the slightly untethered look of a woman who'd been staring at her own reflection for too many mornings running. "Tell me it looks right," she said. "It looks better than right." Lark turned her toward the lawn, the long cedar tables, the garland just visible in the boathouse doorway. "It looks like you." Senna exhaled, her hands stopped being fists. "Jasper thinks I hired too many people," she said. He said that. He said, "This is quite a production." From Jasper, that's the same thing. She bumped Lark's shoulder. He likes you, though. He told Bryce you were precise. Coming from him, that's practically a proposal. Lark said nothing. She held the level against the top rail of the fence post. The bubble sat dead center. She did not feel dead center. The problem arrived at 3 o'clock in a white Land Rover with Quebec plates and a woman at the wheel who drove like she owned the road and probably owned a significant portion of it. Lark was at the side of the house revising the cocktail layout when she heard the gravel and turned and watched Heloise Venn step out of the car the way a statement steps out of a mouth, deliberate, expecting to be heard. She was 50, perhaps, in the way certain women are 50, assembled with care, effective, radiating the authority of someone who had decided long ago that the room was hers and hadn't been seriously challenged since. Leather portfolio under one arm, a smile that landed just to the right of warm. Joelle, Lark said, without raising her voice. Joelle appeared at her elbow, iced coffee in hand, materializing from wherever she'd been watching the entire proceeding. Alois Venn. Corporate comms. Kincaid family's been using her for 15 years. Senna thinks she's terrifying. Senna's right, Lark said. Heloise crossed the gravel, assessed Lark in the fast, complete way of this particular orbit, and said she was delighted to meet the designer and that she'd personally have gone with a larger footprint for the tent. Better photography optics from the bay, but that for a private occasion it was very charming. It's a wedding, Lark said pleasantly, not a press release. Heloise smiled. Of course, she looked toward the house. Is Jasper inside? He was. Lark didn't say so. She went back to her layout. She found out what Heloise needed to discuss 40 minutes later, in the way she found out most things, not by listening at doors, but by standing at the kitchen window reviewing supplier invoices, while the study door drifted ajar 2 rooms away. Heloise's voice came through in pieces, measured and even the way a blade is even. Aldermore Group, Connor Price. His daughter, Sasha, an impression she'd cultivated 18 months ago. A suggestion left to grow in the way that suggestions do when planted in the right soil and never quite corrected. That Jasper Kincaid might, under the right circumstances, be interested in meeting Sasha Price at his sister's wedding. That Connor's board vote was contingent on a certain goodwill. That Sasha was arriving this evening. Jasper's voice, when it came, was so flat it barely moved the air. You told Connor Price his daughter would be my guest. I created an impression that has been useful to us. The Aldermore deal closes this quarter. That is not what I agreed to. That is what I built. A pause. If she leaves without the impression being maintained, Connor reads it as a slight. The deal becomes complicated. You can explain to the 62 employees in the Sudbury office why their positions became complicated at a family wedding. Get out of my study, Heloise. I'll get out of your study. Heels crossed the floor. I won't get out of your problem. The door opened. Lark did not move from the window. Heloise looked at her, and the assessment this time took longer, and arrived somewhere colder. Lark, she said, tasting the name, the designer. Her gaze went back toward the study, where Jasper stood at the window with Georgian Bay behind him, rigid. Then at Lark again. Something clicked behind her eyes that Lark felt like a draft coming under a door. How convenient to be right here. I'm revising the cocktail layout, Lark said. It's what I do. Heloise's smile was a beautiful closed door. Do enjoy the afternoon. She was already elsewhere, phone rising to her ear. Lark set her invoice folder on the counter. Her hands were steady. She took the level from her back pocket. She did not check anything with it. She went to the study. Jasper hadn't moved from the window. The afternoon light cut long and gold across the fieldstone floor. How much did you hear, he said. Enough to know you didn't design this. No. He turned. The flatness should have made him unreadable. It didn't. Not anymore. Someone built it out of my name and a man's vanity and called it goodwill. There's a woman arriving tonight who thinks she's your guest, Lark said. That lands on my floor plan and on Senna's weekend. So I need to know what I'm building around. He looked at her. Something moved in the tiredness behind his eyes. You're building around a lie I didn't tell. I know that. That's why I'm asking instead of leaving. She set the level down on his desk, picked up the cold cup of tea someone had brought and abandoned there, moved it to the sideboard because it was in the way. What do you want to do? The word want seemed to actually catch him off guard, as though the only choices he'd been handed were Heloise's choices, and the word hadn't been part of the vocabulary. I want Senna to have the weekend she planned. I want the woman arriving tonight treated with kindness. I want Connor Price to get an honest phone call from me on Monday, directly. And I want this to be the last thing built with my name without my knowledge. He paused. In that order. Then here's what happens, Lark said. I managed tonight's arrival. I seat her somewhere gracious and far from whatever pressure she's been handed. You keep Senna out of it until after the ceremony. We don't let Heloise turn this into a scene at someone else's wedding. She met his eyes. And you tell me next time before you decide I'm the solution, not after. Deal? The flatness lifted, just at the edges. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the place where one had been recently. Deal, he said. She held his gaze one beat too long and then went to find Joelle. Joelle was in the boathouse, sitting on an overturned cooler eating an apple, looking at the lighting fixture. You moved it. I know. It's better. I know. Lark sat on the dock step and told her the shape of it, the study, Heloise and the portfolio, Sasha Price arriving with a script she hadn't written. The deal made in 4 minutes with a man she'd known for half a day. Joelle chewed. A loon called out on the bay and the sound came back off the water doubled. All right, Joelle said finally. Here's the mean version. You made that deal and told yourself it was logistics. What it actually was a reason to stay in the room. Lark looked at the water. I'm not wrong, Joelle said. No. You've had the face since this morning. The face you had when you took on that impossible timber ceiling in Stratford and didn't tell anyone it would take twice as long because you didn't want to leave the project. She finished the apple, set the core down neatly. He is Senna's brother. Whatever is happening in your chest right now cannot cost her one single thing. The cedar smell was warm and thick. Out on the water a boat went by slow its wake, rocking the dock in a series of patient waves. I know that, Lark said. That's why I'm managing it. Joelle reached over and put her hand over Lark's for just a second. Leave a little room in the plan for yourself. That's all I'm saying. The notebook doesn't have to cover everything. She went inside. Lark sat with the water and the loon and the particular silence that exists on Georgian Bay, only at the end of a July afternoon, and she took the level from her pocket and held it flat on her palm and watched the bubble sit just left of center. It had been off all day. She kept checking. Sasha Price arrived at 6:30 in a rental car, holding a bottle of wine like an offering, and Lark recognized in her face immediately the look of someone bracing to find they don't quite belong where they've been told they do. Lark crossed the gravel before Heloise could reach her first. Miss Price, I'm Lark Hensley. I'm coordinating the weekend. We're so glad you made the drive. She took the wine gently from her hands. Can I show you to your room? Sasha looked at her with something close to relief. Thank you. I'll be honest, I'm not completely sure why I'm here. My father said Jasper specifically. She stopped, glanced at Heloise, who had come out behind them. A small, careful glance at the kind women learn. He said it was important. It's a beautiful property, Lark said, steering her toward the door. The wedding tomorrow is going to be lovely. You'll have a genuinely good time. She got Sasha into the corner room with the bay view and the good reading lamp and a sincere word about dinner, and she did it on autopilot while the real part of her mind ran a different calculation entirely. Heloise had placed 2 people on a board and told neither of them the rules. Sasha wasn't a complication. Sasha was, like Lark, someone handed a plan she hadn't designed and asked to perform it gracefully. At dinner, Jasper greeted Sasha with the courtesy of a man who had been polite his whole life and the warmth of a man meeting someone at precisely the wrong time for reasons that weren't her fault. He said welcome and, I'm glad you came, and both things were true in the specific way that left nothing implied. Lark watched Sasha hear it, watched the small quiet recalibration happen behind her eyes. She watched Heloise register the recalibration and decide the situation could still be managed. It could not be managed. Lark knew this the way she knew when a wall was going to have to come down, before anyone else in the room had begun to suspect it. What she didn't predict was Senna finding out first. She found her at 11 on the end of the dock, feet in the water, rehearsal flowers dismantled in her lap, stem by stem. Bryce's aunt overheard something, Senna said, without looking up. I filled in the rest. A pause. The woman in the corner room thinks she's Jasper's date. Lark sat beside her on the boards, still warm from the day's sun. She's not, she said. She was told a story that isn't true. Heloise built it without Jasper's knowledge. He didn't know how far it had gone. But you did, since this afternoon. Now Senna looked up, and her voice was level, which was worse than if it hadn't been. You and Jasper made an arrangement in the study, without me. To keep me from knowing something was sitting underneath my own wedding weekend. I was trying to protect your day. I know. Senna set a peony stem carefully on the dock boards. That's exactly what Jasper always says. I know he means it every time. And I have spent 6 years trying to tell him I don't need a fortress. I need a brother. She looked at Lark directly, with the full weight of 11 years of friendship. You're the one person here I thought would always tell me the ugly thing. I know, the water talked against the pilings. How long were you going to wait? After the ceremony. Lark held her gaze, which is the wrong answer, I know that. Senna was quiet a long time. A moth ticked against the dock light. The bay exhaled slowly against the shore. Send Jasper, she said finally. Not the version that handles things. The version that loves me and got it wrong. She looked at Lark, and then come back, because I'm not finished with you. Lark found him on the porch steps and said, go to her as the person who loves her, not the person who manages things. She can tell the difference. She always could. He looked at her in the porch light. Then he walked down toward the dock. She stood on the steps and did not follow. She waited. The bay was black and enormous and patient. Joelle appeared with 2 glasses of water and the expression of a woman who had been watching from a respectful and strategic distance. How bad? Joelle said. Senna's not angry, Lark said, which is worse. They watched the dock together. After a while, the larger silhouette sat down on the boards, actually sat, cross-legged. So he wasn't standing over his sister. Something in Lark's chest turned over quietly, like a page going. He's going to be all right, she said. They both are. And you? Joelle said. Lark didn't answer. She drank the water and looked at the dock and felt the level in her jacket pocket, small and brass-fitted and off by exactly enough to matter. What happened on the lawn the next morning was not something she had a section for. Heloise came out at 9:30 with the portfolio and the tone of a woman who had recalculated overnight and arrived at a plan that involved removing the variable causing interference. She said it pleasantly. She said Lark had muddled something delicate, that she'd moved Sasha away from Jasper at every possible moment, that she'd shared information she'd agreed to hold, that anyone watching could see the personal investment at work. You want him, Heloise said, with the calm of someone reading from a document. You have since yesterday morning. I watched you in the boathouse forget to read your own level. She spread her hands. I don't begrudge you the feeling. I begrudge you the damage. Lark felt every instinct she owned stand up at once. She let them stand. She breathed once. Then she turned to Sasha Price, who had come down the hill with her coffee, and was standing at the edge of the group with an expression that had been going through something quiet and conclusive for the last 30 seconds. Miss Price, Lark said, you deserve an honest answer. Heloise built a story about you and Jasper to help a business arrangement. He didn't know how far it went. You were told something that was never true, and that's not fair, and I'm sorry you drove 4 hours to be in the middle of it. She paused. You can leave with your head up, and you'd be completely right to. Or you can stay and have a genuinely good weekend as exactly what you are, a guest, your choice, not mine, not hers. Sasha looked at the coffee cup in her hands. She looked at Heloise. Something settled in her face. The particular settling of a person who has done the arithmetic and arrived at a number she can live with. My father, she said slowly, told me Jasper specifically asked for me to come. She turned to Heloise. You told him that. Heloise said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. I bought 3 new outfits. Sasha's voice was very even. I told my sister I was spending the weekend with someone I was seeing. She set her coffee cup on the garden table, the ice knocking against the glass. Precise. I'm going to pack, and then I'm going to call my father and give him the honest versions myself. She looked at Lark. Thank you for actually saying it. And she walked back up the hill, spine straight, carrying the whole collapsed fiction with more grace than anyone had been given a right to expect. The lawn went quiet. Heloise looked at the space where Sasha had been. She looked at Lark. She looked at Senna, who had come down from the house in yesterday's linen, and a fresh sunflower behind her ear, and an expression that was entirely her brother's face at a younger age. There goes the deal, Heloise said conversationally to Senna, as though they were alone. Your designer made a speech instead of managing a room. I hope the photographs are worth it. She gathered the portfolio, but she's very principled. Principles are so much easier to afford when it isn't your name on the complications. Lark, Senna said pleasantly, did you know Helos once told a reporter that our father stepped down from the company voluntarily? Lark said nothing. He didn't. Senna's voice was still warm. It did not waver. Heloise managed that story too. She's very good at management. She looked at Heloise with the full, mild steadiness of a woman who had finally located the correct address for something she'd been carrying for years. You've been managing this family since I was in braces. I didn't have the standing to say this when I was 20. I do now. She gestured quite gently toward the drive. I'd like you to leave. Heloise's smile held for 3 more seconds, then it didn't. The Connor Price fallout. Jasper will call him Monday, Lark said, with the truth. In my experience, once you give people the honest version, they mostly respect it. And sometimes, said Jasper's voice behind her, they respect it more than they would have respected the managed version. He was standing at the edge of the terrace with a cream envelope in his hand, and he crossed the lawn at the pace of a man who had stopped being in a hurry sometime in the last 12 hours. He held the envelope out to Heloise. Consulting agreement, he said, terminated. The terms are fair. He held it until she took it. You can say whatever you like about me afterward. I've stopped being afraid of the version of me you'd describe. Heloise looked at the envelope. She looked at Senna, who didn't soften. She looked at Lark, who didn't look away. She looked at the whole warm, impossible wedding blooming regardless of her lawn, and something in her recalculated and came up short for the first time all weekend. She put the envelope in her portfolio. She walked to her car. She drove away without looking back. The morning came back into the lawn like a breath finally let go. The wedding was everything Lark had measured and remeasured and shimmed and redirected and driven 4 hours to build. The light fell exactly as she'd predicted through the cedar canopy. The garland moved in the bay wind and threw slow gold shapes across the dance floor, where she'd moved the fixture 12 centimetres south at 11 o'clock on Thursday night. Bryce's hands shook when he said the vows, and he did not hide them. Senna cried and didn't care. The whole thing was real, and slightly imperfect, and exactly right in the way that only true things are. Lark stood in her place with the order of service folder, and the level in her jacket pocket, and the sure knowledge that she did not need to take it out, because for once, everything was already exactly as it should be. She didn't look for him during the ceremony. She was a professional. She watched the cedar canopy and the light on the water and the exact spot she'd positioned the altar, so Senna would have Georgian Bay behind her in every photograph. She looked for him anyway. She was only human. He was standing at the far end of the family row in a suit the color of the bay at dusk, and he was not watching the aisle for Senna. He was watching Lark stand in her place and do her job and hold the whole weekend level with both hands, and when their eyes caught, he did not look away. He let her see the whole of it. The tiredness still there, the warmth under the tiredness, the thing he'd been keeping behind a careful face for longer than either of them had been in the same room. He held her gaze in front of 40 people and an indifferent and ancient bay, and the flatness stayed lifted. Then Senna came, barefoot and luminous, and everyone turned, as everyone should. She found him on the boathouse dock that night. Of course she did. That was where the boards were warmest, and that was where Section C had always been, and some things you plan without meaning to. The reception glowed up the lawn behind them. Joelle was somewhere in the middle of it. Bryce's uncle was doing something regrettable with the speeches. The bay was black glass, and the dock light threw a circle of gold on the water, and Jasper had his jacket off and folded over the rail and his phone nowhere visible. Senna has it, he said when she looked, until Monday. She says I owe her a weekend I actually attended. Lark stood beside him. Not negotiated distance. Just beside him, the way you stand next to something you've stopped pretending you don't want. The deal, she said. Aldermore. Connor Price called this afternoon. Sasha told him the honest version on the drive home, apparently in considerable detail. A short breath that almost made it to a laugh. She's 28 years old, and she said the true thing in one try. It took me 43 years and a designer with a level to arrive at the same place. He turned toward her. I sent her flowers, peonies. It seemed right. Sasha had sent a text that morning. Good luck, she seems worth the trouble. Lark had not told him that yet. She filed it for later. I've been carrying something since yesterday morning, he said. I've been carrying it badly. So I'm going to say it plainly, and you can tell me what to do with it. The bay breathed against the pilings. I take my coffee standing up, because sitting down feels like admitting the day already started without me. I've been managing everything in this family since I was 24, because someone had to, and I was the one who looked most like he could. I go flat when someone gets close. I go flat and stay flat, and I have called that reliable for 20 years. He held her gaze without the flat, without the drawbridge, completely undefended in a way that looked like it cost him. And then you moved a lighting fixture at 11 o'clock at night because the shadow would have bothered you all weekend. You shimmed tent poles in the rain. You told Sasha Price the honest thing in front of Heloise and a full lawn because it was right, not because anyone asked you to. He stopped. The dock swayed, very slightly, in the long, slow breathing of the bay. I have been level-headed my entire adult life. You were the first thing in years that made the bubble move. Lark reached into her jacket pocket. She took out the level, 4 inches, worn smooth at the edges from 11 years of daily use. She held it flat on her palm between them. The bubble sat just left of center. It's been off all weekend, she said. I kept checking. He looked at the level. He looked at her. I love you, she said, plain and certain, and it did not cost her anything to say, which was how she knew it was the realest thing she'd handed anyone in a very long time. Not because you fired Hellas or because you sat down on the dock boards to talk to your sister at eye level. Before all that. Since the boathouse. Since you handed me coffee without asking how I took it and then let me ruin it myself. She looked at him steadily. I plan everything, Jasper. I have color-coded notebooks. I have contingency folders. I have a level I carry in my pocket every single day. She paused. I did not have a contingency for you. He looked at the level in her hand for a long moment. Then he reached out and turned her hand over, thumb crossing her knuckles, warm and deliberate and not 1 second early. He held it there, not managing, not handling, just present, in the way she'd been watching him learn to be all weekend. You keep everything level for everyone else, he said quietly, even when yours is off. Even when you're standing on a stepladder at 7 in the morning and a man you've never met walks in and you miss the reading entirely. I never miss readings, she said. Her voice was not quite steady, and she let it not be. I know, the corner of his mouth moved. That's how I knew. He kissed her then, and it was unhurried and certain and exactly firm enough, and it did not let go a half-second early. Up the lawn, a sound went up from the direction of the reception. Senna Carmody, née Kincaid, in her wedding dress with bare feet and wet eyes, who had been watching the dock with the attention of a woman who had done all the arithmetic and was enjoying every digit of the answer. The dock light swayed. The bay threw the whole improbable summer of it back off the water doubled. Lark said against his shoulder, I missed the bubble reading. He said, I know. I caught it. They were married the following May at a small property outside of Elora, Ontario, because Lark had designed a dozen events at the Kincaid estate and found it difficult to be a guest somewhere she knew all the load-bearing walls. She handed the whole thing to Joelle, sat in the front row in her good boots and her honeysuckle crown and, out of a habit 11 years old, the level in her jacket pocket. She did not take it out once. Jasper was waiting under the ash tree in a suit the color of Georgian Bay at dusk, and he watched her come over the petals with the particular attention of a man who has decided to trust his full weight to something and found, to his genuine and lasting surprise, that he does not need to check whether it will hold. When she reached him, before the efficient, before the words, he leaned in and said so quietly it was almost only for her, the way he had the very first morning, You didn't bring the notebook. I planned for today, she said, and took his hand. I planned for exactly this. In the front row, Joelle blew her nose loudly into a tissue, decided she was giving at minimum 3 toasts regardless of what the program said, and looked at Senna sitting beside her, 6 months round with a baby. She and Bryce talked nightly through the wall of the Elora cottage, radiant and barefoot even now in a May that had no business being this warm. You knew in the boathouse, Joelle said. I knew in the boathouse, Senna agreed. You didn't say anything. I did the math, Senna said, and settled back in her chair with the satisfied expression of a woman whose arithmetic has never once been wrong. It came out even. The ash tree moved in the warm lake wind. The bubble sat dead center. For once, Lark didn't check. She already knew. If a woman who keeps everyone else's world level and forgets to leave room for her own tilt is the kind of story that stays with you. If you believe the person holding the whole room together deserves someone who notices the load and chooses to share it, then stay a while with us here at Platinum Files. Subscribe, settle in. We'll tell you another one. There's always more to level.